He doesn't belong in first class. That's what she told the captain, through a quiet report wrapped in fake concern. He's acting odd. Might be a security risk. Minutes later, he was escorted off the plane, in front of a cabin full of well-dressed silence. No outburst, no explanation, just a black man, removed from a seat for being too confident, too composed, too sure of himself in a place they thought he didn't fit. They didn't ask for proof. They didn't need to. One glance was enough. He was marked, flagged, reassigned, his premium ticket replaced with a middle seat in coach, and a note on his profile that would follow him through the system like a stain. But here's what they didn't know. He wasn't just a passenger. He wasn't just another man of color in the wrong row. He was something far more dangerous to a broken system. A man with the power to rewrite it. 48 hours later, he wouldn't be asking for his seat back. He'd be owning the airline. And now, you're about to find out how it happened. Before we dive in, hit that like button if this opening hit you hard. Subscribe for the full journey. We're just getting started. And drop a comment. What would you have done if this happened right in front of you? Also, tell us, where in the world are you watching this from? The terminal pulsed with the rhythm of departure. Overhead announcements echoed off polished tile floors, mingling with the rolling clatter of designer suitcases and the soft murmur of privileged voices. In the middle of it all, Michael Carter stepped into the first-class check-in lounge of Air Nova Airlines. He moved with quiet confidence, head held high, passport in one hand, e-ticket on his phone in the other. He wore a navy blue polo shirt tucked into pressed khakis, clean sneakers, and a classic silver watch. Neat, professional, but simple. Too simple for some. Vanessa Hastings, the lead flight attendant, stood just beyond the gold-plated barrier. Her posture rigid, eyes trained to detect disruption. She scanned the crowd of elite travelers filtering toward the luxury counter. When her gaze landed on Michael, her expression shifted, barely perceptible, but telling. Her eyebrows tightened. Her lips pursed, subtly. She tilted her head slightly to the left, as if trying to recalibrate what she was seeing with what she thought she should be seeing. Michael offered a polite nod as he stepped forward. "Good morning," he said, his voice even and warm. Vanessa didn't return the greeting. Instead, she tapped the button on her earpiece. "Security," she said under her breath, just loud enough for the attendant beside her to hear. "Possible unauthorized access at first class. Male passenger, mid-30s. No visible credentials." The attendant raised a brow, uncertain. "He's walking up with a boarding pass." Vanessa replied smoothly, "Let's confirm it's real. We've had people slip through before." Michael, unaware of the quiet alarm he'd triggered, handed over his phone for scanning. He smiled gently, projecting patience, used to lines, used to waiting, used to proving things. The young woman at the kiosk took the phone, scanned it, and blinked at the result. "Mr. Carter, you're in 2A. That's correct." Vanessa leaned over, glanced at the screen, and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir," she said, her tone clipped but professional, "would you mind waiting over here for a moment while we verify some information?" Michael looked confused for only a second. Then he nodded. "Of course." He stepped aside as requested, though a few heads turned. A man in a tailored suit frowned slightly. A woman in heels whispered to her husband. Vanessa turned to the other attendant and said, under her breath but not quietly enough, "I swear, they just let anyone in these days. Makes you wonder if first class still means anything." The words weren't meant for Michael, but they found him all the same. He didn't flinch. Instead, he turned slightly, just enough to glance out the window at the private tarmac. A soft breeze rustled through his memory. The kind of day when his father used to drive him to the airport just to watch the planes take off. Back then, he dreamed of being a pilot. Life had taken him elsewhere, but the sky always called. The scanner beeped again as the other passengers checked in. No one else was stopped. No one else was questioned. Vanessa folded her arms. Her eyes darted to the side, waiting for security to show, though no actual breach had occurred. She was stalling. Michael checked his watch. He said nothing. After a moment, the supervisor on duty stepped forward. A tall woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. She looked between Vanessa and Michael, then reviewed the scanner screen. "Problem?" she asked curtly. "No," Vanessa said too quickly. "Just being cautious." The supervisor turned to Michael. "You're all set, Mr. Carter. Apologies for the delay." Michael nodded again, calmly. "No problem." But as he stepped through the golden archway and into the first-class lounge, the murmur of voices trailed behind him like shadows. One man muttered something about affirmative action upgrades. A woman scoffed, probably redeemed credit card points. Vanessa remained behind, whispering again to the attendant at her side. "I mean, look at him. Does he look like someone who belongs in 2A?" Michael heard none of it. Or perhaps he heard all and chose to rise above it. The lounge was quiet, scented with citrus and leather. Crystal glasses clinked softly as attendants refilled champagne flutes. Michael found a seat by the window. His phone buzzed, a reminder of the meeting he had the next day. The one that would finalize his firm's acquisition bid. $40 million private equity, direct control over a failing airline desperate for tech innovation. He looked down at his boarding pass again. 2A, not just a seat, but a test. And they were failing it. Michael adjusted the strap of his carry-on bag as he approached the boarding counter. The lounge behind him still hummed with quiet opulence, but the tension in the air followed him like static. He had barely settled into the boarding line when Vanessa, her name now visible on a thin gold badge over her pristine uniform, stepped forward with a raised hand. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice flat and slightly too loud. "Can I see your boarding pass one more time?" Michael paused, surprised. "Sure," he said, handing her the same digital ticket that had been scanned twice already. She took it with a perfectly rehearsed smile and tapped it against her handheld scanner. A small beep confirmed the match, but she frowned as if it hadn't. She muttered, tilting the screen away from his view. "It seems there's still an issue." She pulled a slim silver pen from her pocket, drew a small diagonal mark across the corner of his printed backup ticket, and held it out. "This might be an internal code error," she explained, slipping the pen back into place. "You'll need to return to the front desk. Ask them to reprint your boarding pass. It shouldn't take long." Michael took the ticket back, looking at the sharp red slash she'd drawn on it. "It scanned fine earlier," he said evenly. "Twice." Vanessa offered a quick shrug. "System glitches happen. Protocol." Behind him, two men in tailored suits exchanged glances. One of them stepped forward, impatient. "Can we board now? We've got a conference call in 40 minutes. Vanessa turned smoothly, letting her voice rise a fraction. "Of course. Right this way, gentlemen." As they passed, one of them cast a glance toward Michael. Not hostile, just almost patronizing. Michael stood for a beat longer, his jaw tightening. Then, with the same quiet composure he always carried into boardrooms and acquisition meetings, he turned and walked back toward the desk. The front attendant looked puzzled when Michael handed her the marked ticket. "Sir, this has already been verified," she said. "I don't see any problem with your reservation." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Apparently, your colleague up there thinks otherwise." The woman leaned forward, reviewing his file on the screen. "Confirmed. Seat 2A, priority boarding, paid in full 2 weeks ago. I'm not sure why she redirected you." Michael gave her a polite nod and turned to head back, but even as he walked, he could feel the weight of perception shifting around him. Small whispers, the sound of silence too sharp in places it should have been casual. Back at the gate, Vanessa was speaking into her headset again. Her tone lowered as he approached. She clicked it off before turning back to him with a syrupy smile. "All good." Michael said nothing, just extended the pass. She waved it off. "No need," she said lightly. "You may board now." As he stepped toward the jet bridge, she added with a soft laugh, "Just double-check next time, Mr. Carter. Wouldn't want you boarding the wrong flight. This is Air Nova, not the city bus." The chuckle came too fast, too rehearsed, like she'd used the line before. Michael froze mid-step, the quip hitting harder than if she'd shouted. He turned halfway, met her gaze. For a long second, neither said anything. Then Michael smiled, not warm, not angry, just unreadable. He boarded without another word. Inside the aircraft, the ambience shifted from confrontation to cold efficiency. First class was already half filled with quiet professionals. A silver-haired CEO flipping through slides on a tablet, a woman reviewing contract notes on her phone, a teenage boy in a blazer who looked born into this cabin. Michael moved to his seat, 2A, window side, extra legroom, fine leather. He stowed his carry-on, slid into the seat, and folded his hands over his lap. A young attendant walked past with a tray of pre-departure drinks. She skipped his row entirely. Michael leaned back, looking out at the tarmac, where the golden glow of early afternoon bathed the fleet of jets in static light. It was familiar. He'd spent his early engineering days designing engine calibration systems for mid-size commercial aircraft. His code was still embedded in some of the older models. He knew how these planes worked, better than most of the crew. He knew about redundancies and systems checks, and what happens when a sensor misfires. But what wasn't part of any manual was how people misread each other, how the wrong face in the right seat triggered alarms no algorithm could explain. He pulled out his phone again, opened his calendar. The meeting scheduled for tomorrow still blinked. Finalize acquisition Air Nova Systems Division. His name wasn't on the agenda. He preferred it that way. As lead architect behind Carter Ventures' quiet restructuring strategy, Michael had spent months preparing for this move. Air Nova's board didn't even know he was flying in tonight, let alone sitting in their premium cabin. The irony wasn't lost on him. From the corner of his eye, he saw Vanessa step on board briefly. She did a quick sweep of first class, scanning passengers, pausing at each row, but not his. As she turned to leave, she caught his gaze for half a second, then looked away. The smile was gone. The seat beside him remained empty. Eventually, the door closed. The plane began its pushback. Michael closed his eyes not to rest, but to review everything, every word spoken, every action taken, every assumption made. He didn't dwell on it emotionally. He dissected it, cataloged it. Like data, he wasn't the type to respond in anger. He believed in leverage, in timing, in choosing when the weight of who you are finally lands, loudly, decisively. Somewhere down the aisle, a passenger asked for a blanket. Another requested a different wine. A voice murmured something about someone being in the wrong seat earlier. The flight climbed into the sky. Michael didn't move. He watched the clouds shift layer by layer, like veils pulled from a truth people didn't want to see. The aircraft had reached cruising altitude, and the usual rhythm of cabin service began to unfold with practiced grace. In the front galley, Vanessa smoothed the lapels of her uniform, adjusted a tray of wine glasses, and leaned toward a younger flight attendant named Claire. Her voice was steady, measured, but intentionally audible. "Claire," she began, letting her tone carry a slight edge of exasperation. "Have you noticed how many of these first-class passengers aren't really first class anymore? We're being taken advantage of. The system's being gamed." Claire looked up surprised, but before she could respond, Vanessa added, a bit louder this time, "Lately, it's been happening a lot. People finding loopholes, points, vouchers, sneaky bookings. We have to stay alert. Can't let just anyone walk in here and redefine the standard." The words hung in the air like the subtle hiss of cabin pressure, reaching far beyond their intended recipient. 2 rows back, a businessman lowered his newspaper slightly. Across the aisle, a woman in pearls glanced sideways. The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded, with assumptions, implications, judgments. Michael sat in 2A, watching the clouds through the oval window, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. He had heard the comment. Of course he had. She wanted him to. His ears were trained to catch shifts in tone the way some people caught the scent of danger. He didn't move, didn't turn. But inside, something adjusted, quietly, methodically. A recalibration of tolerance. The young attendant, Claire, approached with the beverage cart. Her face was flushed, not from the altitude, but from discomfort. She smiled nervously as she reached for a flute of chilled, sparkling water resting in crystal. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said, trying her best to hold professionalism intact. But before she could hand it over, Vanessa stepped in. "Claire," she said sharply, "use this." She reached behind her and grabbed a white paper cup, unbranded, plain. Claire hesitated for half a breath. Then, obediently, she poured the water into the disposable cup and extended it to Michael. He turned from the window, glanced at the cup, then looked up at her, with eyes calm and unblinking. Claire held the cup like a peace offering, apologetic and small. Vanessa, standing just behind her, offered a thin smile. "It's safer," she said with mock concern. "Wouldn't want any accidents, right?" Michael accepted the drink without a word. He set it down gently on his tray table. Around him, the subtle chorus of shifting bodies began to build. One man coughed unnecessarily. Another adjusted his cufflinks with exaggerated precision. Someone cleared their throat loudly, as if to punctuate the tension. The woman in pearls from across the aisle leaned toward her husband and whispered something. He responded with a shrug, but his eyes lingered on Michael a beat too long. Michael reached into his bag and pulled out a leather notebook. It wasn't for writing. It was for creating distance, for controlling narrative without words. He opened it slowly, flipped to a blank page, and began to sketch lines, angles, engine cross-sections, technical renderings that once grounded him in classrooms, then boardrooms, and now, in the middle of 30,000 feet worth of silent judgment. Vanessa continued down the aisle, checking belts and trays with robotic efficiency. But her eyes darted back to Michael's row every few steps. The passengers around him had shifted from passive to reactive. Their looks no longer held confusion. They now carried quiet appraisal. Was he supposed to be here? Did he belong? One man even leaned slightly toward the aisle, as if expecting Michael to get up and reveal that this was all some mistake. Michael had seen this before, at private client dinners, where the sommelier always handed the wine list to his junior associate, at tech expos, where investors assumed he was the driver, and now here, 37,000 feet above sea level, in a cabin designed to celebrate exclusivity, he was once again made into a question mark. Claire returned 20 minutes later with hot towels. She didn't make eye contact as she handed one to Michael. He accepted it and offered a quiet thank you, which he returned with a nod so quick it almost vanished. Vanessa followed behind with a tray of wine. She didn't stop at row 2. She didn't offer him a choice of reds or whites. She kept walking. Michael folded the towel carefully and placed it back on the tray. Then he leaned his head slightly to the left, catching a whispered conversation between the man in 2B and the flight attendant just ahead. "That guy," the man murmured. "He boarded late, right? Wasn't there some issue?" The attendant hesitated. "I can't say, sir." But the seed had been planted. Michael turned the page in his notebook, drew another arc. Wing curvature, airflow dynamics. He didn't need to concentrate. The sketches were reflexive, meditative. His mind was elsewhere, tracking, measuring, weighing. In row 3, the woman in pearls crossed her legs and gave a soft huff. Her body turned slightly away from Michael's row, a social signal as old as etiquette itself. At the front of the cabin, Vanessa was arranging silverware for dinner service. The clink of forks on china, the rustle of napkins being placed just so. Everything continued as if it were normal. But Michael knew better. This wasn't first-class service. This was strategic neglect. Weaponized civility. He looked down at the paper cup, now warm from the pressurized cabin air. It sat beside his sketchbook like a symbol. Disposable. Temporary. Inferior. He picked it up, took a slow sip, then placed it back down, still without comment. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing smooth air ahead and estimated arrival times. Passengers relaxed into their seats. A few laughed quietly at in-flight entertainment. But around Michael, the social air remained heavier, thicker, coated with the subtle smoke of judgment Vanessa had lit but never claimed. Michael adjusted the collar of his polo, straightened the crease of his slacks, and closed his notebook. The first impression had been made. The room, this flying microcosm of class, power, and perception, had already decided who he was. But Michael hadn't spoken yet, and when he did, he wouldn't need to raise his voice. The hum of the engines and the low clatter of service carts created a background hum that would normally lull passengers into a state of relaxed attachment. But Michael remained acutely aware. The paper cup still sat untouched on his tray. His sketches had been tucked away, but his focus had only sharpened. There was something about the way Vanessa moved, efficient but with pointed intent, that felt more than merely dutiful. She lingered too long in certain rows, whispered too deliberately, and now she stood again near the front, speaking quietly into her headset while throwing fleeting glances toward row 2. Michael didn't shift in his seat, but his senses calibrated like a radar. He watched without watching as she tilted her head and said, "Cabin to cockpit, I have a concern. Passenger 2A has been unresponsive, avoids eye contact, and shows signs of agitation. Possible behavioral risk." Her voice was steady, matter-of-fact, designed to raise a red flag without causing panic. The kind of coded language that security teams are trained to act on without hesitation. Within minutes, a uniformed crew member discreetly approached Michael's row. He leaned in, apologetic but firm. "Mr. Carter, we'd like to ask you to step off the plane for just a moment. There's been a minor system discrepancy we'd like to clear before takeoff." Michael looked up slowly. "System discrepancy?" The man nodded. "It won't take long." Around them, several passengers adjusted in their seats, the energy in the cabin shifting again. Michael exhaled once, calmly unbuckled his seatbelt, and rose. He took his bag and stepped out without resistance, but with every movement, he knew this wasn't about security. This was control. The narrow jet bridge was quiet, cold from air-conditioned vents above. A ground staff officer stood with a tablet in hand. "Sir, we've been asked to verify your boarding status. There may have been an error in the seat assignment." Michael offered his ticket and ID, his voice calm. This was scanned and confirmed 3 times already. The officer, who seemed more confused than confrontational, nodded and tapped through his interface. "Yes, everything's here. Seat 2A confirmed. Cleared through TSA. Booked directly through the airline." He glanced up, uncertain, not sure why this flag was raised. Michael gave him a look that stopped short of challenging. "Me neither." The officer stepped away to speak briefly into his headset, likely reporting the clearance back to the plane. Michael stood still, centered. The flight was still being prepped for departure. Time was ticking. After several minutes, the officer returned. "You're good to go, sir. Sorry for the inconvenience." Michael nodded once and re-entered the aircraft. But when he arrived back at row 2, his seat was occupied. A new boarding pass had been placed in his hand by the same uniformed crew member. "Apologies, Mr. Carter," the man said. "It looks like there was a reshuffle. You've been reassigned to 19C. Michael glanced down. Row 19, main cabin, middle seat. He turned his gaze back to the man, who avoided his eyes and added quickly, "It was a system adjustment. These things happen." From the front, Vanessa watched the moment unfold with the poise of someone who had already prepared the narrative. Her expression was unreadable, her arms crossed just below her badge, her eyes sharp. Michael studied the new boarding pass. The numbers had been re-encoded. Someone had entered the system, overridden the original assignment, and printed a new one, legally formatted, internally synced. No room for dispute. He looked at the seat where he had once been. A man in a navy blazer now occupied it, sipping wine from a crystal glass, oblivious. Michael said nothing. He walked slowly toward row 19. The cabin narrowed. The seats tightened. The luxury faded into practicality. Around him, the contrast was stark. Fabric headrests instead of leather, smaller monitors, less space. The passengers, here, barely looked up. This was not the section that was scrutinized. This was not the section where status was policed. He reached 19C, stowed his bag, and sat down. The man by the window barely acknowledged him. The woman in the aisle seat shifted slightly to give him space. Michael sat with his hands in his lap, breathing evenly. He had seen systems like this before, ones that punish silently, with just enough plausible deniability to appear procedural. He opened his phone and logged into his frequent flyer account. The app showed his history. All valid. All confirmed. He scrolled further. A red flag had been added next to today's flight. Seat reassignment. System error pending resolution. A lie. Logged in code. He closed the app. Somewhere in first class, Vanessa resumed her work, polishing glasses and adjusting linens. She said nothing about the passenger who had been moved. No one questioned her judgment. No one needed to. Because that's how it works, Michael thought. You don't need proof when perception is weaponized. You just need a uniform, a little authority, and a system that trusts you without question. And in trusting you, erases someone like me with one keystroke. He turned his head toward the aisle, watching the carts pass, the glint of silver trays, the voices murmuring up front. Nothing about his demeanor had changed. But inside, something had locked into place. Not rage, not revenge, calculation. The shift to row 19 hadn't changed Michael's posture. He sat with the same composed poise as before, legs crossed, hands resting lightly on his lap, eyes forward, not defiant, not submissive, simply still. But within him, thoughts moved like machinery, calibrated, cold, focused. The fluorescent lighting of the main cabin cast a harsher tone than the warm ambience of first class. He felt no shame sitting where he sat. It wasn't about comfort or even principle. It was about message, about how far people would go when they thought no one important was watching. He heard footsteps, then the click of heels. Vanessa was moving down the aisle again, ostensibly checking compartments and overhead bins, but clearly scanning for reactions. Her voice rang out in a pleasant tone as she neared row 18, where a pair of business travelers were discussing their connection time to Denver. She paused at their row and turned slightly toward them, her voice still coated with civility, but her words sharp as a scalpel. "It's interesting," she said conversationally, "how some people carry themselves like they've always belonged here, even when it's clearly their first time." One of the men looked at her, amused. "Talking about someone specific?" Vanessa gave a delicate laugh, then lowered her voice just enough to make it feel like a shared secret. Row 2. Or at least, he was in 2. Moved now. Something about a booking issue. But the way he walked in, confidence turned all the way up. Some people really know how to fake it. She smiled again, then moved on without waiting for a reply. Michael didn't need to hear the whole thing to know what she said. He didn't have to see her point or feel the glances to know how the narrative was being reframed. He understood how easily reputations were restructured, not by official statements, but by suggestion. The whisper campaign had begun. Around him, passengers weren't hostile, not overtly, but he could feel the change. The subtle hesitation when someone bumped knees and didn't apologize. The way the man in 19B shifted slightly away from him in his seat, feigning discomfort. The way the flight attendants now passed him without acknowledgement, as if he were part of the scenery, not the service. It was social surgery, removing someone from legitimacy without drawing blood. A few rows up, a male flight attendant with a buzz cut and easy smile began making his way down the aisle with slow, deliberate steps. He paused at Michael's row, leaned slightly in with a disarming smile and said, "Mr. Carter, right?" Michael glanced at him. "That's me. Just wanted to say sorry about the earlier confusion." The man continued, voice warm, tone casual. "Sometimes the system gets weird. We've had a few reshuffling issues lately, especially with status verification. Hope it didn't cause too much frustration." Michael nodded once, polite but reserved. "I'm used to systems malfunctioning," he said calmly. "They're only as good as the people running them." The flight attendant gave a chuckle, a genuine one. "Ain't that the truth? Anyway, if there's anything you need, don't hesitate. I'll be around." He gave a small, respectful nod and continued down the aisle. Michael watched him go. The man's shoulders relaxed, his body language open. It felt genuine. Or at least, it almost did. But as the attendant passed row 14, he paused beside a passenger who had been fidgeting with the air vent. They exchanged a few words, inaudible to most. Then, softly but with just enough edge to stick, the attendant said, "The guy in 19C? I heard he got flagged before." Miami flight, last year. Tried to board with a premium ticket. That wasn't his. Got caught just before takeoff. Not the first time something like this happens. Surprising, isn't it? The passenger didn't reply audibly, but his body tensed. His eyes darted down the aisle toward Michael's row, subtle but unmistakable. The rumor was launched. Michael continued staring ahead, eyes calm, but the muscles in his jaw tensed ever so slightly. He knew what had just happened. The classic two-step: extend a hand with one, insert the knife with the other. Smile while planting the seed. Keep the accusation soft, indirect, and unverifiable. Perfectly designed to spread without being traceable. A slow erosion of dignity. Michael leaned back, closing his eyes, not to retreat, but to reset. In his mind, he began reconstructing the timeline, not just of the flight, but of every system failure that had brought him here. The initial scan, the false flag, the reassignment, the shift in service, the whispers, the lie. He had spent years working on predictive systems, algorithms that could anticipate user behavior, identify fraud, isolate anomalies. He could now see, with terrifying clarity, that this plane operated under a far more dangerous code. Human instinct, guided by bias, unchecked by oversight. The male attendant returned to the galley as if nothing had happened. Vanessa passed him on the way, and they exchanged a look, just a flicker of something unspoken, as if confirming a silent agreement. Meanwhile, in the main cabin, Michael Carter sat still as stone. He didn't ask for wine. He didn't call for assistance. He didn't protest. Because men like him had learned that silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Dinner service began with a kind of quiet elegance that defined Air Nova's luxury image. Soft ambient lighting dimmed the cabin to a gentle dusk. White linens were laid over tray tables, and silverware clinked delicately as attendants moved in synchronized rhythm. Even in the main cabin, where space was tighter and menus less elaborate, the performance of refinement was maintained. But Michael noticed one detail immediately. His row was passed over. He had specifically ordered a vegetarian meal during online check-in, not out of preference, but necessity. Years of clean eating discipline kept his energy sharp, his focus tighter than most. He waited patiently as the attendant reached row 18, then 20, trays clicking into locked arms, dishes distributed with warm smiles. When she finally reached 19, she paused with a puzzled look. "Meal preference for 19C?" she asked aloud, glancing at her manifest. Michael replied calmly, "Vegetarian, confirmed at booking." The attendant scanned her list again, then shook her head. "I don't have a vegetarian meal assigned to this seat." Michael remained composed. It should be attached to the original booking, seat 2A. At the mention of his previous seat, her eyebrows raised subtly. "Let me check with the lead." She disappeared toward the front. Several minutes passed before Vanessa herself returned, her professional mask firmly in place. "Mr. Carter," she said crisply, "unfortunately, special meals are prioritized for our Platinum tier members. Since your current profile reflects a standard status, the vegetarian request wasn't fulfilled." Michael looked her directly in the eyes. "I made the request during booking, when I was assigned to A." Vanessa tilted her head in the practiced gesture of performative patience. "That assignment was reclassified. Meal distribution follows current seating and membership tier. I'm afraid there's nothing I can do." She didn't blink. Michael's face remained unreadable. "Nothing at all?" Vanessa smiled faintly, as if apologizing for something beyond her control. "We have chicken or beef." He didn't respond immediately. He just glanced down at the tray already being handed to the passenger beside him. A warm, plated entree with steamed vegetables, garnished and served with a cloth napkin. "Chicken is fine," he said eventually. "Very good," Vanessa replied, and walked away without further comment. Michael accepted the meal, but didn't eat. His appetite had dulled, not from hunger, but from awareness. This was no longer a matter of misplaced seats or inconvenient service. It was about erasure by design. Every system, every protocol was being applied selectively, subtly reshaped around him to justify treatment that otherwise had no grounds. He took out his phone, opened the Airline's app again, and navigated to his profile. Everything looked intact: miles logged, flights flown, preferences saved. But a new line had been added under his name: status review pending. He set the phone down. Across the aisle, a young man scrolled casually through movie selections, headphones already in. Behind him, a mother tried to keep her toddler entertained with a coloring book. Around him, life went on, quietly, dismissively, as if nothing unjust had occurred at all. The flight landed just after sunset. Disembarkation was orderly. Michael exited without speaking to anyone. No one stopped him. No one looked twice. But when he returned to his hotel later that evening and connected to the lobby's Wi-Fi, his inbox held a message flagged important. The subject line read, "Action required Air Nova membership suspension." He opened it. "Dear Mr. Carter," it began. "This notice is to inform you that your Air Nova rewards account has been placed under temporary suspension pending investigation. During Flight N247 from Chicago to San Diego, your name was flagged due to a behavioral concern reported by cabin crew. Specific references include failure to comply with seating instructions and disregard for meal service protocols. As a result, your ability to redeem miles, access priority services, or modify upcoming reservations has been restricted. We appreciate your cooperation as we complete the review." Michael stared at the screen. There were no links to dispute the claim, no human contact information, just a generic membership at airnova.com address and a button labeled Acknowledge. He didn't click it. Instead, he logged into the secure dashboard of his firm's corporate server, accessed the private travel liaison portal, and retrieved the metadata from his original reservation: timestamp seat selection, special meal request, verification logs, and boarding scans. All of it matched what he remembered: clean, uncompromised. Except that now, the record marked seat reassignment, system error, and the profile tag included "Watch for elevated request patterns." The phrase chilled him more than he expected. It didn't accuse him of anything, but it implied everything. This wasn't just an error. It was institutional gaslighting. He was being positioned as problematic, without confrontation, without recourse, without so much as an opportunity to respond. The airline wasn't punishing him for breaking rules. They were creating the appearance of rules being broken, then writing the consequences retroactively. A digital scar, encoded in bureaucratic language. Michael sat back in the hotel chair, the glow from the laptop casting sharp lines across his jaw. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't storm out. He simply began documenting every detail, every timestamp, every discrepancy. He copied the full reservation log into a secure folder. He exported the app screen to PDF. He began assembling a report, not for complaint, but for strategy. He had seen this kind of play before in boardrooms, when legacy firms tried to push out minority stakeholders by manufacturing performance misalignments and quietly revoking their access to data streams. He dismantled entire frameworks built on quiet bias. Now, they were trying it on him, at 35,000 feet, in plain view, with napkins and wine glasses and vague apologies. He closed the laptop, picked up his phone, and opened a contact saved simply as VE Legal. His finger hovered for only a second before pressing call. The wheels touched down with a subtle shudder, the tires gripping the runway as the engines roared in controlled reverse thrust. The cabin jolted ever so slightly, and seatbelt signs remained illuminated as the aircraft decelerated. Michael sat motionless in row 19, his phone already in hand but untouched. The glow of the terminal lights outside was pale compared to the kind of illumination that was about to take place inside his world. He waited until the plane slowed to taxi speed. The announcements began, the usual thanks for flying, reminders to remain seated, promises of punctual baggage return, but they passed over him like elevator music. His mind was elsewhere. He unlocked his phone, scrolled to a specific contact folder marked with a 3-letter code, OSG. No name, just a secure line routed through encrypted servers. He tapped the number. On the second ring, someone picked up without greeting. Michael spoke clearly, his tone devoid of emotion. Proceed with Phase 2, 40 million USD. Full transfer authorization to Carter Ventures via Alpha Holdings. Immediate acquisition of 35% voting equity in Airnova. Use the layered shell route. Hold my name out of public record until final resolution. A pause. Then a quiet reply. Understood. Execution begins now. Michael ended the call and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. The exchange had taken less than 30 seconds. No fanfare, no anger, no dramatic pause, just surgical precision. As passengers began to disembark, Michael rose with deliberate calm, retrieved his carry-on, and stepped into the aisle. No one spoke to him. The flight attendants didn't make eye contact. Vanessa stood near the galley, her posture straight, her attention fixed elsewhere. If she noticed him leaving, she gave no sign, which was exactly as he wanted. He exited the aircraft into the cool jet bridge, each step measured, each breath steady. Outside, the sky was a dusty orange, San Diego's early evening settling in like a well-worn suit. He moved through the terminal like any other traveler. No bodyguards, no briefcases, no entourage. Just a man walking through an airport. A black sedan waited curbside. Michael slid into the back seat, placed his bag beside him, and gave the driver a nod. Downtown, he said simply. The city blurred past the tinted windows, but his focus remained on the silent buzz of confirmation notifications vibrating against his leg. One by one they came in. Alpha Holdings transfer complete. Carter Ventures acquisition routing engaged. Share positioning. 35.2% voting power secured. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. This wasn't revenge. This was infrastructure. It wasn't enough to prove them wrong. He was going to own the system that allowed them to be wrong so loudly and so freely. At the office suite downtown, tucked into the top floor of a boutique finance tower, Michael stepped into a minimalist conference room with floor-to-ceiling glass and a panoramic view of the bay. A single monitor was mounted at the end of the room, displaying a secure live dashboard. One of his senior advisors, a tall man in a charcoal suit with sharp features and sharper instincts, greeted him. "It's done," he said without ceremony. "We routed through Luxembourg, then Singapore. Final holding falls under Carter Ventures through Aegis Capital Partners. No trace to you in any public ledger." Michael nodded. "Board meeting. Set for Thursday," the advisor replied. "Airnova's quarterly emergency session. They're calling it to discuss restructuring. They don't know you'll be there. They don't even know why the seat at the end of the table's been reassigned." Michael walked toward the window, his reflection meeting him in the glass. Below, the city pulsed with unknowing life. 48 hours ago, he had been labeled a disturbance, a mistake in a seating chart, a problem to be quietly moved to the back. Now, he was the largest voting shareholder in the company that had tried to erase him. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need a press release. What he had needed, what he had always understood, was leverage. Now he had it, in absolute, undeniable form. He turned back to the screen. The data streamed steadily. Executive salary charts, route performance, employee evaluations, incident logs, all live, all accessible, including Vanessa's crew manifest, including the internal annotation attached to his own name. He read it carefully. Note: passenger in 2A reassigned due to system flag. Behavior noted as confident, potentially disruptive. Meal request denied due to status mismatch. Subject did not challenge reclassification. The phrasing amused him. Behavior noted as confident. Since when was confidence a risk factor? He highlighted the entry and attached a silent marker. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet ping to the compliance review system. It would trigger a deeper audit within 72 hours. No accusation, just scrutiny. The kind that people like Vanessa weren't used to being on the receiving end of. And it would come not as punishment, but as procedure. The same tool she had used against him. The advisor spoke again. "Would you like to be physically present at the shareholder session or call in from New York?" Michael considered this, then replied, "I'll be there. In person. They need to see the seat they thought was empty." The advisor nodded once, said nothing more. Michael picked up a glass of water, took a sip, and let the city lights rise outside like a tide. The systems that erased people like him thrived on quiet assumptions and whispered permissions. But now he sat behind the curtain. He controlled the light. Vanessa was finishing her morning coffee in the crew lounge when the email came through, its subject line in all caps: mandatory. Service strategy, alignment briefing, attendance required. The message was short, formal, and unusually cold. She blinked once, reread it, then glanced around. Other crew members were beginning to murmur, phones in hand, expressions tight with uncertainty. Meetings happened all the time, but the phrasing on this one, alignment, mandatory, executive restructuring panel present, was new. It didn't come from her regional supervisor. It came from someone listed as executive control, CVC Holding Group. The name meant little to her, just another shadow investor. She assumed someone who wrote checks and signed reports but never appeared in person. She didn't know that those three letters, CVC, stood for Carter Ventures Capital, and that the man behind them had already memorized her full name. At exactly 10 a.m., she entered the executive conference hall at AirNova's West Coast corporate campus. The room was colder than usual, both in temperature and tone. Large glass panels offered a view of the skyline, but inside, all eyes were focused on the long, polished table, where 10 leather chairs were now occupied by people she didn't recognize. A large digital screen displayed the agenda: Strategic Reset Service Division Oversight. A few crew leads whispered to each other. Some tried to appear relaxed, but tension bled through every movement. Vanessa took her seat, fourth from the left, and straightened her blouse. She recognized no one at the head of the table until the double doors at the far end opened. Michael entered without announcement. He wore a navy suit tailored with precision, a crisp white shirt, and no tie. He moved with calm deliberation, each step measured, each gesture restrained. A silence settled across the room, like fog. For the first 3 seconds, Vanessa didn't react. She was looking down at the agenda on her tablet. When she looked up and saw him standing at the end of the table, her eyes widened, barely. A quick inhale. She recognized him immediately, not as the man who had flown into A, but as the man who had been moved to row 19, the man she dismissed with practiced indifference, the man whose presence now radiated absolute control. Michael sat down, placed a slim leather portfolio on the table, and opened it without looking around. The advisor to his left cleared his throat. Thank you all for being here. Today's session is led by Mr. Carter, representing Carter Ventures Capital, principal voting partner of AirNova Holdings. A pause. No one spoke. Michael looked up. His voice was calm, not loud, but carried the weight of finality. Let's begin. He tapped a button on the tablet before him, and the display behind him shifted to a list titled Directive Reforms. His eyes didn't leave the screen. Effective immediately, he began. All customer data manipulation must pass through dual verification layers. No staff member will have sole access to edit seat assignments, membership profiles, or onboard service notes without a secondary audit trail. Every change will be time-stamped and tied to a unique ID. This is not negotiable. Vanessa sat straighter, her eyes fixed on the text appearing on screen. She didn't blink. Michael continued. Second, the tier-based service model, offering varying levels of treatment based on reward point accumulation, is discontinued. Permanently, every passenger receives equal attention, equal courtesy, and equal accountability. If that expectation is not met, consequences will not be procedural. They will be structural. Murmurs rose around the room. A few crew supervisors exchanged glances. Someone tried to raise a hand. Michael ignored it. He advanced the slide. Third, he said, AirNova will begin a full internal audit under an external ethics committee, reviewing every report, every complaint, and every service note for the past 2 fiscal years. We will isolate all data correlated to race, appearance, and customer background, and evaluate every pattern that may indicate systemic bias. Anyone found perpetuating discriminatory practices, overt or covert, will be suspended pending formal review. permanent dismissal will follow if behavior is verified. The room went quiet, not stunned, paralyzed. Michael closed the tablet and folded his hands. He looked around the table, not with accusation, but with clarity. Vanessa could feel her own pulse behind her eyes. Her breath remained steady, but every syllable of his voice replayed inside her head. She wanted to speak, to raise an objection, to clarify what had happened that day. But something told her this was not the moment. Not with him here. Not with the record already written. Michael looked at her only once, briefly, and then moved on. "This is not a disciplinary action," he said. "This is a redefinition. Air Nova's future cannot be built on selective hospitality. Our brand is not luxury. Our brand is accountability. That begins today." He stood. The advisor rose with him. The presentation ended without questions. No applause. No polite dismissals. Just the cold, clinical silence of a hierarchy being restructured from the top down. Vanessa remained seated as others slowly gathered their belongings. She looked down at her tablet again, where her name still sat beside the word active. For now, Michael exited the room as he had entered, silent, composed, unshaken. But everything behind him had shifted. He didn't need to remind anyone of who he was. He had already rewritten what they were allowed to be. The week after the meeting arrived with the kind of silence that announced something bigger than noise ever could. There were no press releases, no internal memos filled with red-letter urgency, no dramatic scenes unfolding in the break rooms. Everything moved as it always had, on schedule by policy, but something had shifted, deeply, unmistakably. Vanessa received her transfer notice on a Thursday afternoon. It came in the form of a standard HR notification, no additional commentary, no conversation. The subject line was clean, professional. Assignment update, effective immediately. Inside, just 2 sentences stood out. Effective immediately. You are reassigned to Domestic Operations Ground Support, Technical Services Division. Report Monday, 7:30 a.m., Terminal C. That was it. No explanation. No appeal. She read it 3 times, then let the email sit open on her screen, the white background burning quietly into her eyes. No one around her reacted. Word hadn't spread, and it wouldn't, not officially, because this wasn't punishment by spectacle. It was consequence delivered in silence. Vanessa didn't cry. She didn't storm into anyone's office. She simply closed the tab, leaned back in her chair, and stared at the window. The view of the tarmac she once admired now looked foreign, like a place she'd be locked out of. She had built a career on control, of passengers, of perceptions, of procedures that bent in her favor. And yet here she was, reassigned not to another cabin, not to another crew, but to the back end of the airport. No more polished aisles. No more linen gloves and sparkling wine. She would now be handling headset logs, cargo tags, and crew manifest verifications. Ground support, the lowest rung above disciplinary suspension. By Friday, murmurs began to surface, not about Vanessa specifically, but about changes. A section in the internal portal labeled Performance Recognition Forecast had been quietly removed. Teams expecting their quarterly bonus brief found only a gray placeholder. Department managers were notified that the discretionary bonus fund for the customer service division had been frozen indefinitely. The phrase used in the circular email was simple: pending comprehensive ethics review. Behind that phrase was a quiet storm. Across multiple hubs, personnel files were being opened, not for promotion, but for audit. Names that had long evaded scrutiny were now flagged for secondary review. Anyone who had authorized unilateral seat reassignments, denied service on subjective rounds, or filed incident reports laced with coded language now found themselves under digital magnifying glass. The audit algorithms weren't looking for volume. They were looking for patterns. And the patterns told a story. A regional supervisor in Dallas, who had reassigned over 20 passengers citing attitude misalignment, within a single quarter received a notification that her employment was under review. A gate manager in Atlanta who had repeatedly marked black passengers as late arrivals despite confirmed on-time scans was pulled into compliance sessions. No formal accusations were made, but roles began shifting quietly. Performance incentives vanished. Work schedules were adjusted downward. Unspoken accountability took the place of corporate shame. At headquarters, the effects were just as deliberate. The executive board ratified a new clause into the hiring charter. All candidates for client-facing roles must undergo equitable service assessment prior to onboarding. The clause didn't mention race, gender, or class. It didn't need to. Everyone knew what it meant. The metrics had changed. Service wasn't just about punctuality and procedure anymore. It was about fairness, perceptiveness, and restraint. One HR manager described it as the Carter Clause, though no one said it aloud in meetings. Michael never reappeared in person that week. He didn't need to. His decisions moved through systems like current through wire, unseen but impossible to ignore. Every action taken had his signature, even when his name wasn't printed. The structure he rebuilt didn't rely on loud corrections or firings in front of peers. It relied on architecture, policies so sharp they cut without leaving a scar. The company began to adjust not because they were told to, but because they knew the spotlight was now fixed in places they used to hide from. Vanessa packed her desk on Sunday night. She took nothing but her badge and a small binder of crew certifications. No one called to check in. Her name disappeared from the first-class staffing rota. The uniform she used to wear with pride now hung limp on a hook in her laundry room. She didn't know what her new role would look like, not yet. But she understood one thing with chilling clarity. She was no longer in control. The knock at the glass door was soft but deliberate. Michael looked up from the stack of operational reports in front of him, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across his desk. The floor was quiet, the kind of silence only executive levels knew, thick with power, expectation, and control. When the door opened, he wasn't surprised to see Vanessa standing there. She no longer wore a uniform. Her hair was tied back in a plain twist. Her blazer was corporate gray, not the sleek navy of the first-class crew. She stood with both hands at her sides, a small manila envelope clutched tightly in one of them. She said nothing for a moment, eyes scanning the room, not in awe, not in defiance, but in quiet understanding. Michael gestured without a word to the chair across from him. She sat. There was no immediate exchange, no formal greeting. Vanessa placed the envelope on the desk, pushed it gently toward him, then leaned back with her hands folded. "It's not a request," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "And it's not an excuse." Michael opened the flap and pulled out a single sheet of line paper, creased from being folded once, not sloppily, but with intent. It was handwritten. The first line read, "I thought I was following protocol, but I see now I was just enforcing barriers I never questioned." He read the entire letter without speaking. Her handwriting was small, neat, without flourishes. The tone of the message wasn't defensive. It wasn't emotional. It was clear. She admitted to her role, not just in his experience, but in the system that had allowed her behavior to go unnoticed. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She acknowledged harm. When Michael looked up, she didn't look away. She held his gaze without flinching, the same way he had held hers that day at the gate, only now the balance had shifted. He folded the letter, placed it back into the envelope, and set it down beside the corner of his desk. Then he said evenly, "Most people wait until they're caught to write this kind of letter." Vanessa nodded. "I figured the cameras didn't catch much, and no one filed anything formal, so maybe I should have just moved on." She paused. "But I couldn't." Michael studied her for a moment, searching for the usual tells, guilt laced with fear, shame tangled with justification. But there was none of that. She looked empty of performance. "The job was never about making passengers feel small," she said. "At least, that's what I told myself. But when I looked at your face that day, and then saw the seat number change, the tray, the way I spoke, I realized something. I didn't just doubt your place there. I needed you to not belong. Because if someone like you belonged in that seat, then I had to question everything I believed got me mine." Michael didn't answer immediately. He leaned back slightly, the weight of her words settling between them like something fragile. Then he said, "I don't need your apology." Vanessa nodded. She expected that. But, he continued, I need you to understand something. There are hundreds of new hires coming into this company every quarter. Some of them will look like you. Some will look like me. And most of them will carry biases they don't even recognize. He reached into a drawer, pulled out a slim folder labeled Internal EDP, Equity Development Program, and slid it across the desk. This, he said, is our unconscious bias reorientation project. Ground-level staff, team leads, regional managers, all of them go through it. But what we need is someone who's seen both sides. Someone who stood where you stood, and then chose to see what's behind the curtain. Vanessa looked at the folder, then back at him. You want me to teach them? Michael shook his head. No. I want you to unteach them. I want you to walk into that room, not as someone who got reassigned, but as someone who knows what it means to mistake hierarchy for truth. She didn't answer right away. She looked down at the envelope she had brought in, then at the program outline he had given her. Slowly, she nodded, not out of gratitude, not for redemption, but because she knew he was offering something few people ever got. Not a second chance to prove themselves right, but a first chance to make something right. I'll do it, she said finally, but not because I think it fixes what I did. I'll do it because someone else is watching the next two-way walk-in tomorrow. And I want them to see a passenger, not a problem. Michael stood and extended his hand. Vanessa took it. And in that moment, with no photographers, no applause, no headlines, the real shift happened, not in seats, not in systems, but in people who chose to see and unlearn and begin again. If this story got you thinking, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like the video. It really helps us bring more narratives like this to life. Which moment hit you the hardest? Was it the silence, the power shift, or that final conversation? Let us know in the comments below. Also, where are you watching from? Drop your country or city. We'd love to see how far this message is traveling.